Hello fellow Clashers, it is Kairos and welcome to another Kairos Tournament tier list, August 2017, where we take a look at the stats provided by statsroyale.com and go specifically into Grand Challenge usage and win rates to determine which cards are the best and the worst in Clash Royale. Thank you so much for jumping on today's video. Last time I did a tier list, it was for the ladder, the Legendary Arena. Today we're going to be jumping back into the regular tier list for competitive tournaments. So what really counts here is competitive tournaments, tournament standard cards. As such, I did want to make sure that you were aware that the win rates and the usage rates are in the comments section below and also in the description of this video. You can also take a look at the Reddit post that has way more depth when it comes to all the stats and how they've changed and fluctuated since the last tier list. Let's go ahead and start with the S tier. This is the excellent cards for the meta. These cards are either really great for the current meta, or they just offer really great versatility. They frequently can be used in almost any type of deck, and that's why they're on the S tier. Now, old S tier cards, we have the Log, Zap, and then the Ice Golem, and new to the S tier, we have the Electro Wizard. Now, the Electro Wizard itself, I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be overpowered. I don't think that it needs any nerfs or anything like that. Maybe if it did just a tiny little bit. He's moving up to the S tier as a kind of a replacement for Night Witches. The Night Witch was super common in any type of deck, and as she got nerfed pretty heavily, people are looking for another solid card to act as just a very versatile offense and defense in almost any type of situation. The Electro Wizard is useful in siege, beatdown, control decks, and it doesn't really matter what you're playing. As such, he definitely fits into the S tier category. Also making her way up into the S tier is the P.E.K.K.A. Now, I was actually really hesitant to put the P.E.K.K.A. into the S tier as a win condition because the P.E.K.K.A. itself isn't necessarily super overpowered or overbearing, but the fact that Lava Hounds and Graveyard usage has decreased, which are other good win conditions to use, means that the P.E.K.K.A. counters nearly every single other win condition. The Giant, Golem, Hog Rider, the P.E.K.K.A. is just a beast in the current meta right now, and it's no wonder that people are throwing her into all sorts of different types of decks, graveyard combinations, hog riders, bridge spam decks as well. The P.E.K.K.A. can be used in nearly any type of combination with another deck, except for maybe other beatdown cards like the Golem or the Giant, although that might be considered as well. She definitely brings a lot of value to the table and is difficult, and you definitely have to plan on seeing the P.E.K.K.A. in the meta because she is being used all over the place. So make sure you have some counters to her or consider using her yourself. Next is the A tier. The A tier are the cards that are very good for the meta. They're not meta defining. It's not like you have to count for all of these cards in the meta, but you will see them frequently and they're good options to have in your deck. New to the A tier, we have the Graveyard. The Graveyard is going from the A tier, from the S tier all the way down to the A tier because because of its recent nerf. It just takes a little bit more time to really get some good value out of that Graveyard. It takes some more skill and some practice and dedication. I do think it is a very good option. Now, a lot of people aren't treating it like it's a very good option. They're treating it maybe more like a B or even a C tier card. But the reason why I think it is a very good option is because the P.E.K.K.A. is very present in the meta, and we've also seen a decreased usage rate in Poison. As such, I think that the Graveyard is definitely a card to try and consider. People just need to take a little bit more of adapting to figure out exactly where it fits into the current meta. Next, we have the Ice Wizard, going from the C tier up into the S tier. With his recent buff, at Tournament Standard, he will clear skeletons and bats in one hit. Now, he actually had an overall decrease in damage per second, but his damage per shot increased just enough to be able to get rid of those two troops. As such, he definitely has a good use in the current meta. He's going all the way up to the A tier as a very strong defensive card, and as we're seeing some more usage of bats, as well as some skeleton army just a tad, the Ice Wizard is definitely a very good option to use in the current meta. Next is the Bandit. The Bandit is going from the S down to the A tier because although she didn't receive any nerfs or anything like that, the meta is kind of built around kind of countering her. The perfect card to pair up with the Bandit, the Battle Ram, also is being seen a lot less and because of its nerf. And as such, the Bandit just Still a very good option, but I wouldn't say that she's defining the meta right now, especially because people are having Goblins and Ice Golems to really try and counter her, as well as some other cards as well. Then we have the Poison going from the A down to the S. The reason why the Poison was in the S tier in the first place was because the Night Witch was just so overwhelming, and the Poison was a very obvious good use or counter card to counter the Night Witch. As such, with the Night Witch kind of getting out of the meta, I think that it's fair that the Poison gets brought down just a little bit into the A tier so we can compete with other cards like Lightning or Fireball when it comes to high damage spells. Next we have the Hog Rider. Now the Hog Rider is actually going from the B tier up to the A tier, and the Hog Rider really struggled in the Night Witch meta because she was so prevalent and it was really difficult to get value with the Hog Rider. Now even though we are seeing a lot of P.E.K.K.As in this meta that are a very good counter to the Hog Rider, I think that the Hog Rider is a very good option in this meta because it does force your opponent to either place that P.E.K.K.A right at the closer to the bridge, which makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to defend against them because they're going to have to take some more time to try and defend against that Hog Rider. You can also definitely outcycle a P.E.K.K.A with that Hog Rider very easily. As such, I think that the Hog Rider does deserve a spot in the A tier. Next we have the Fireball. Now with the Night Witch being replaced with the Electro Wizard, it's making more sense to include the Fireball in your deck, and it's kind of coming up from the B tier and being an even playing field with that Poison. It's still a very good option to use, it just kind of depends on what kind of deck you're going to be selecting. You'll definitely want either the Poison, Fireball, or Lightning in your deck, depending on what your deck counters and does not counter. Next we have the Bats. The Bats have the biggest jump in tier from the F tier all the way up to the A tier. That additional bat that was added to the Bats actually really helped the Bats out a lot. Now they're not necessarily super threatening by themselves, but the fact that they do have that 5th bat means that their increase of damage per second really makes them a great card in the current meta. Now, there are definitely people that have Zaps or even Baby Dragons in their deck, but for the most part, more people are actually playing the Log than Zap in their deck, although Zap is very popular. As such, the Bats really help you take advantage of your opponents when they don't have Zap in their deck. Very good option to be using in the current meta. Now, to keep your opponent in check if they are using Zap instead of the Log, we do have the regular Goblins. The regular Goblins really do apply some pressure onto your opponent if they do not have the Log, and as such the Bats and the Goblins actually play kind of a interconnected role with Zap and the Log. Nowadays, it's probably best for you to choose Zap or Log depending on what your deck is specifically weak to, and make sure that you do have counters to either the Bats or the Goblins, because you can expect to see one of them in the majority of the decks in the meta currently. Up next we have the B tier, which is the good cards for the current meta. These are the cards that are good to really help balance out your deck and maybe kind of focus on building your deck around these cards, but not quite so much. They tend to be good in specific types of decks, but not in every type of deck. And new to the B tier, we have the Lava Hound. Now, the Lava Hound is going from the C tier up into the B tier. The Lava Hound really took a dive as soon as the Night Witch defined the meta. The Lava Hound really struggled, and I think that now with P.E.K.K.As being more common in the meta, and people focusing on having anti-ground threats, I think that the Lava Hound as an air threat, paired up with other cards like the Balloon, is a good option to use now. I think that it's usable, and especially if you do like playing Lava Loon. Next we have the Night Witch. The Night Witch took a huge dive with that nerf that Supercell really hammered down on her, going from the S tier down to the B tier. I think that the Night Witch is still a good option. She doesn't fit into every single deck like she used to, but she is usable in certain types of decks, like some Golem beatdown decks, or even some P.E.K.K.A bridge spam decks. Now we have the Expo, going from the C tier up into the B tier for most players. I actually think that the Expo could be an A tier card in the hands of the right player, but for most people it's a good option, and right now is a really good time to try and learn Siege because of the buff that the Expo did receive. It still does struggle a little bit against like P.E.K.K.A decks and such, but paired up with really defensive cards like the Golem, the Ice Spirit, the Ice Golem, Ice Spirit, and Ice Wizard, you can create a Snowbow deck that is very strong for the current meta, as well as some other different type of Expo combinations do definitely work. Then we have the surprising Dark Prince, got buffed and is moving from the F tier up into the B tier. I think it's interesting to see that the Prince is actually taking place of a lot of battle rams in some types of bridge spam decks, and even as a support card in some Golem decks. The Dark Prince does seem to have a good spot in the meta right now where he's not too strong, but he's good. You can use him in the right type of deck, and I like that about the Dark Prince now. Then we do have the Skeleton Army. I do think that the Skeleton Army is usable. I like the fact that it is not very easy to log an entire skeleton army, and that makes it a good option against P.E.K.K.As, which are very prevalent in the meta. Obviously, if you're going to be using the skeleton army, you might also want to have some other type of cheaper card that can't be zapped, like the Goblins or even the Goblin Gang. Next, we have the Battle Ram. Going from S all the way down to B, its nerf made this card very much less threatening. And I think that that was good because it was very overwhelming in the meta. And I do think that the Battle Ram can be used, but now you do have a couple different options where you have either the Dark Prince or the Battle Ram if you're building some type of a bridge spam deck. I've actually found that you can get some more value using the Battle Ram in the very back. Not every single time. Sometimes it's good to put it at the very front, but also sometimes putting it in the very back and letting it build up some speed while you have some time to build up Elixir and build up a push, that can be a good option at times. Next, we have the Mini P.E.K.K.A going from the F tier up to the B tier. The Mini P.E.K.K.A was placed into the F tier because the Night Witch just replaced him. The Night Witch was better in almost every single way, and now that the Mini P.E.K.K.A got a little bit of a buff and the Night Witch got a little bit of a nerf, I think the Mini P.E.K.K.A is a good card to be using. He very possibly could be an A tier card, but I'd like to see a little bit where he ends up going into the meta right now. Next, we have the Dark Goblin going from A to B. A similar experience with the Dark Goblin. The Dark Goblin was in an A tier because of the Night Witch. Now that the Night Witch isn't super prevalent, there's not as many reasons to include the Dark Goblin in your deck. Now we do have the Minion Horde. I've actually been starting to see a little bit more Minion Horde in here. The Minion Horde does a really great job at countering P.E.K.K.As, especially because they can't be zapped, they can't be logged. You literally have to have some type of an anti-air splash troop like the Baby Dragon with a P.E.K.K.A to actually get value on an offensive P.E.K.K.A if your opponent has a defensive Minion Horde. They're a good option. I don't think that they are the cards to use all the time, but they are the good option in the right types of decks. Now we do have the Goblin Gang. We've seen some usage for the Goblin Gang in bait decks, but other than that, the Goblin Gang hasn't really fit in a lot of other types of decks. They have some value, especially for bait decks, but they're good for right now. Definitely a good option to choose between either the Goblin Gang or the Skeleton Army, or both of them if you're going for some type of a bait deck. That being said, with an increase in usage of bait decks, they were one of the most popular decks to win the 20 win challenge with. I do think that arrows are a little bit of a better option in your deck if you are struggling against bait decks. Definitely something to consider, especially if the Minion Horde does become a little bit more popular. Now we are up to the C tier. The C tier is the fair tier. These are cards that they're okay, and you can get some value with them if you are able to do so, if you have the skill, and if they're in the right kind of deck. These are the kind of cards that you'll want to include for specific roles in your deck, but they're definitely not cards that should be thrown into every single deck. New to the C tier, we have the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie was in the B tier because of her ability to really defend against graveyards, and graveyards were a lot more popular before they got nerfed. Now they're not as popular, and so the Valkyrie is serving a little bit less of her purpose. She is outshined a little bit by the Dark Prince because the Dark Prince can add a little bit more speed to defense, to an offensive push. And as such, she's mostly a defensive card, and it's more difficult to get some good value out of her. Then we also have the Heal. Now the Heal spell is still usable in Three Musketeer, Minion Horde Heal decks, but it's a very specific card to be used in a very specific deck that we're not seeing as much of recently. I do think that a very skilled player could still pull off the Heal very well. In fact, I did face a few people in the 20 win challenge that really put me into tough situations because of the Heal. but I do think overall the heal spell deserves to be in the C tier. Finally, we have the F tier or the poor cards. These cards can be used and get some value every now and then, and some of them are a lot of really fun to play with, like the Sparky Giant Skeleton, the 3 gimmicky spells, Freeze, Clone, Rage, as well as the Mirror, but they don't offer value consistently, and I wouldn't consider using them in a competitive deck very frequently. When it comes to new F tier cards, we actually do not have any for today. Now, I normally do some type of a nerf list and a buff list, but I don't actually think that the meta actually really needs it right now. I'd like to see how the Mega Knight actually changes things. We'll see what kind of combinations he does bring about into the meta, and then we'll consider doing a nerf list and a buff list as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I love hearing your comments and your feedback in the section below. If you agree with some of these things, and if you disagree, I want to hear it. Go drop a line down in the comment section and let me know what you thought about this video. Also, make sure you check out my collaborator here. General NX helped out with the making of this video, and I do have many other silent supporters as well. Thank you so much. You guys are fantastic. I hope you have a great day. This is Kairos time ticking by, and we will see you in the arena.